You are listening to the Mothergood Podcast, episode number 67. We at Mothergood believe that there's no way to be a perfect mom, but many ways to be a good one. Our content is judgment-free within the context of evidence-based research. Adele, thank you so much for joining us on our show.
My pleasure. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we're so excited to have you on. I know that I've followed you for a while on Instagram, and you've previously shared your motherhood story as a Mothergood feature on our platform, and you just have a beautiful life and beautiful family. So before we jump into your story, could you tell us about yourself?
Sure. So I have 6 children. We're expecting our 7th in May. We live in Virginia, and I always knew that I wanted a big family, and I didn't know exactly when or how that would happen. But my husband, Ben, and I were high school sweethearts, and we got married during college, actually. I went on to get my master's at Harvard and always assumed that I would just keep going and become a professor. But when I was in grad school, there were several women who I respected that really recommended that I have a family first, as opposed to waiting until probably I would have just be starting a family right now if I had gone the whole PhD tenure track. So by the time I graduated from Harvard, I was 7 months pregnant with our first daughter. And so that just put me on a totally different trajectory over the past, she's almost 13 now. So during that time, we have had 5 more children, are expecting our 6th, so 7th total. And I've really loved and cherished my time at home with them and have sort of embraced the challenge of finding creative outlets and ways to feel fulfilled as a whole person, whether it's through friendship or some creative outlet or ministry while I'm at home with them. So right now, I unexpectedly am finding myself as a homeschooling mother to 6 children because all of my children are home for the rest of the year. At the very least, we know that in our state that they will not be going back to school. So that's been my latest project I've been working on, is finding ways to make that sane and fun and creative for all of us.
It's definitely a very strange time to try to juggle all of that with the homeschooling and then everything that's going on with the epidemic. So I'm kind of curious, when you're talking about the advice that you got from the older women that had careers, why did they say and why did they recommend to have a family first? I'm just so curious to know that the reason that they gave.
Yeah. So actually, a lot of them had difficulty when they eventually did try to start a family. So for a lot of them, it was just a very pragmatic, it's so much easier when you're younger biologically. And so I knew that I wanted to have big family. When we got married, I told my husband I wanted 9 kids. He said 3. So we're officially tipping the scale in my direction once this baby is born. So yeah, they just, a lot of them had really experienced a lot of suffering because when they finally did kind of check all their boxes and do everything right, and they tried to start a family, it was really difficult for them. And some of them couldn't have kids. Some of them, it just took a really long time. So they were basically just saying, listen, you're married. You want to have kids. The easiest time to do it biologically is now. Go for it. So just having these women that I really respected, who had great professional success, giving me that advice really kind of made me reprioritize.
That's such great advice, and advice that you don't really hear that often. And even though it's really true, because I know one of my friends, she's a doctor in Los Angeles, a pediatrician actually, and she said that so many of her patients are older moms, which obviously there's nothing wrong with that if that's how your life circumstances take you, that it just didn't happen for you at that time. So not saying that that's a bad thing, but a lot of them had a lot of difficulty getting pregnant. And for most of them, it was a choice. They put their career first, and then they're just starting their families, and they're mid to late 30s, and it's a lot more difficult for them, even keeping up with all the kids. So I think that was...
I can feel that now. I now officially am. This is my first pregnancy that I am advanced maternal age. So I can feel it. I am slowing down. I'm tired, pretty tired in the evenings, but there are lots of ways to go about having a family. And there's so many different beautiful paths to it. Looking back, I'm thankful that, that we kind of embraced welcoming the children in our marriage earlier on, just because it really did reorient our priorities as a family in a way that put things into place a little bit. And I have no idea what our path would look like if I had, gone on to get the PhD immediately, but just looking back, I'm really thankful for each of my kids and the path that we have in our family.
And talking about your education, you went to Harvard, right? I just don't want you to sell yourself short on that one.
Yes. Yep. I have a master's from Harvard. Yep.
So when you're talking about how having a big family has made your family more family oriented and just realigned your family, what are some ways that having a family early on and not putting off motherhood has realigned your family? Like what are some examples of that?
So I think part of it is also Ben and I got married really young. So we really became adults together. We have been dating since I was 15 and he was 16, and got married the day before my 21st birthday. So we were really young. So looking back on that, I think that there's something very natural and easy about passing through those thresholds together, because it's not like we had these two totally separate lives that we had to reconcile and make compromises and negotiate and consolidate into one life, but we really were kind of journeying together into adulthood. And similarly, having children and becoming adults sort of at the same time. I mean, I was 23, 24 when my first daughter was born. So as we were making these big decisions, where do we live? How do we live? What are our priorities? What do we value? What do we want to spend our time and energy and money on? Family and marriage and children were always a part of it. So I think for us, like those early years were super lean. I love to tell the story that the first year that we were married, the first and second year that we were married, we had a budget of $50 a week for groceries, and we would take that money out in cash from the bank, and so we'd walk down to the grocery store and buy what we needed for the week, and whatever we had left over, we kept in a jar in our kitchen, and that was like our free spending money. We could go out and get coffee or something if we had something left over. So we just learned to live really, really simply during that time, because we were a young couple. Ben was working, I was in school. But I'm thankful for that, because there was always a sense that the stuff, what we have, fine dining, like that stuff is not the core of who we are as a family or what is important to us as a marriage, or, throwing a kid into the mix when I was pregnant while I was still in school and Ben was working. We just didn't even have the time or money to worry about all the stuff. So I'm thankful for that, because I think it's so easy to get caught in that spiral of, we need the gear and the things and the perfect house and whatever it's going to be, but just making all of these idols out of things that we all are attracted to because they're beautiful, so there's something that draws us to them. But I'm thankful for the fact that we, just because of necessity, we couldn't really pursue those things early on. So I feel like it gave us this like the core of our marriage was our love for one another and also our willingness to sacrifice for one another. So just welcoming kids into the mix, that came pretty naturally. And I have to say, every single kid we have, there's so much sacrifice that's required of you as a mother. So just being in that mode of like, we're all just doing what we can to make this work. Welcoming a child into the mix felt natural in that way. So I think that's what, to answer your question about just living for another person, instead of saying, here is, like when we had kids, it was a time that a lot of our friends really identified by their ambition or their hobbies or their interests, or whether it's travel. So I think for us, very early on, it became like we are a family and we are all giving up parts of ourselves for whatever that is. And over time, I think the joy has really come from finding a way that we all as a family, like Ben and I and the kids together, can pursue those things together. But I think that was the big way that it reoriented it, is that it was never like, career, hobby, marriage, and then kids or something. It just kind of all was very interwoven early on.
And a lot of people have to make that adjustment later on when they do have kids anyway. I know that I got that advice early on in my career, that try not to scale up too much when, both spouses are making full-time income at the peak of your careers, because most moms, when they have kids, they do want to scale back in some manner, even if they are working. And then that means an adjustment too. So it sounds like you never really had to make that scale up and scale down adjustment because of that. So I think that's great.
That's true. Yes. And I think that's my one piece of advice for people is early on, try to see if you can survive, try to see if you can find a way to survive off of one income, because that just gives you the flexibility, whether it's that you want to work part-time, whether it's that your husband wants to work part-time, but finding a way to kind of make accommodations for your family. I think a lot of people do get into a point where they're kind of trapped with their finances, whether it's a mortgage payment or whatever it is. So that's my practical advice to young couples, is just don't try to scale up too much, because it is really difficult. You get yourself into some commitments that are difficult to scale back on.
Right, exactly. So I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about what exactly it's like to have a big family. I come from a family of 4, and believe it or not, growing up in Southern California, that was actually considered more on the big side, I guess, for Southern California. But
I believe it. Yeah.
I still don't think that truly is considered a big family. So I would just love to find out more about what it's like to be in a big family, and then also why you think it's so beautiful, because I know that you talk about that a lot on your